Good morning. Let me remind what I hope this new way of communicating is all about. The purpose is to share whatever wisdom and insight I, as your father, have gathered, and so that you can benefit from that. Society has decided, whether you like it or not, that all children nowadays, 100 years ago that was different, have to go to school, to education, as a way of transmitting the wisdom that has accumulated. So that's a big demand on your time. I'm a small one compared to that. But yeah, I search for means to share what's alive in me, so that you can take it on board and see what it means to you. And then specifically, I want to share in 3-4 sessions something about Buddhism, and that again has two purposes. One is that you come from at least partially from a Buddhist country, so it seems to make sense to me that you know the basics, as far as I know them, but I want to transmit and share the basics of Buddhism because it might help you to be self-aware of one of the cultures that you come from and confident about it. And the other one, of course, is that also your dad and mom, myself and Giem take this to heart, so it means something to us. And of course, I will share from my point of view, Mommy might share from hers. So when I said 3-4 sessions, that is, I want to share about what is called the 3 yanas, or 3 vehicles, Tekpa in Tibetan. And then a 4th session probably about Shambhala. So Buddhism is often explained from the Tibetan tradition, from the Bhutanese tradition point of view, as having 3 major approaches or 3 turnings of the wheel. We'll come to the fact that other people look at it differently. They are known as Hinayana, Tekchung in Tibetan, that is translated as lesser or smaller or foundational vehicle. That is where you work on yourself as a person, as an individual. Then there is Mahayana, that's the second one. Maha means big, so Tekchung in Tibetan or Bhutanese. That is the bigger, the larger vehicle where you want to work with others as well. And the first one was called foundational. To compare it to Mahayana, it's not that Hinayana is less, in the sense of less good, but it works from the personal point of view. Sometimes Chögyam Trungpa made a comparison, first save yourself and then save the world. He compared it to what they say in an airplane. First put on your own seatbelt and then help others, or put on your oxygen mask yourself first, that especially. Because if you don't put on your safety mask yourself first, you'll run out of oxygen, you'll be less able, you don't have the resources, you don't have the non-violence in yourself, issue I'm working on, to be beautiful contribution to the world. So the idea is that you need to work on yourself first in order to be valuable contribution to the larger world. And of course they go hand in hand. It's not that you have to self-perfect yourself completely 100%, but nevertheless, these are 2 stages. Hinayana, Mahayana, Tekchung, Tekchen. And then the third one from the Tibetan point of view is Dorji Tekpa, or Vajrayana, the indestructible or diamond vehicle. So these 3 yanas I hope to discuss in the 3 sessions, and then maybe one about Shambhala as a tradition within the Dorji Tekpa Vajrayana tradition. Maybe about these 3 vehicles that we first focus on, and of course today is for Hinayana, lesser vehicle. They are both a classification in terms from a scholarly point of view, that you have from a logical point of view. First you have maths A, and then you have second level, third level. So they have been taught in Tibet as how you enter the path and how you proceed. At the same time, there is a actual, and it's not only in Tibet, by the way, it's back to the Buddha. It's called the turnings of the wheel, the first turning, second turning, third turning. So that is how it is as a teaching means, how you can look at the teachings, divide them in 3 parts as a teaching means. But it's also partly a reality how Buddhism is shared today in the world. And there's some difference, but there's a large overlap. We can say that the Hinayana tradition, which by the practitioners themselves is called Theravada, the older tradition of the elders, where the older practitioners submit something, share something, transmit something to the next generation. That tradition is most alive in Sri Lanka, Thailand, largely in Burma, some parts of Vietnam, although that also has the Mahayana tradition, Cambodia. So it's called the Southern Stream nowadays. Of course, India, Buddhism lived in India first, both Hinayana, Theravada, and Mahayana, and then later on Vajrayana came to be larger. Some say it goes definitely back to the Buddha himself. And then the Mahayana has gone more to the north. It's the dominant form of Buddhism in China, large parts of Vietnam, and then China and Tibet is also called Mahayana. So although we are going to talk about Vajrayana, that is a particular form of Mahayana Buddhism. Mahayana just meaning, we'll come back to that in the next session, meaning the heart of wanting to share with others rather than just be by yourself and work on your own stuff. And once again, they are sequential. You cannot usefully start to share with others if you haven't practiced something yourself, not come to any realization. So then the official topic for today is Tek Chung, Hinayana. I've started to say a few basic things about it. It is a one-person vehicle. It is it's for self-liberation. And it is the insight, intellectually speaking, you have the insight that you are not a solid being. You find out that the world might be something solid. In the Mahayana that is reviewed, but in the Hinayana you recognize that you are not a solid entity. Your body is going to perish. That's very clear. You can meditate on that. You can raise your awareness of it so that you're well aware that each moment is unique and therefore fresh, and that you don't carry on too much resentment or old emotions and project them on the new ones and get stuck in old patterns, because every moment is fresh and has the quality of being awake. So it's a one-person vehicle. Then the Mahayana is a many-person, everybody, every insect, every being. Some people even feel trees and rocks are included. You bring everybody along before yourself, and the Vajrayana you can say is a fast vehicle. It's like a Porsche. It's like a special means within this vast aspiration of being of relevance to everybody. It has special means to expedite that journey and to make it very personal and very direct. So the Hinayana practice has often been done in forest. People practice meditation, they contemplate about impermanence, death, suffering. Those are the juicy, lovely topics for some of the topics for the Hinayana. In fact, I want to talk about 2 foundational teachings. One is called the Four Noble Truths. That is very well known to belong to Buddhism, and it belongs to this classification of Hinayana, which is recognized by all the other schools as well. If you talk about recognizing each other's practice, then everybody agrees that the teachings called sutras, what the Buddha has spoken, related to the Theravada or Hinayana tradition, everybody agrees that those are valid teachings actually authentically given by the Buddha. For the Mahayana, some practitioners of Theravada or Hinayana might put question mark whether that really goes back to the Buddha himself. And for the Vajrayana, many people within Mahayana are not aware that these are teachings at least initiated by the Buddha himself and later on inspired by the Buddha himself. Yeah, so I said I will discuss a little bit about the Four Noble Truths, and then I want to talk about taking refuge, becoming a Buddhist. What that means and what it does not mean. That's quite beautiful to understand, and it was refreshing for me. Recently I went to a weekend about it to refresh what it is all about. So for the Four Noble Truths, it's the truth of suffering. So it doesn't say that everything is suffering, but that all the time again and again, we hope for things to be different than how they are. And we want them to, some nice things we want to remain the same, and of course they change, and we fear that they are going to change, and eventually they surely will. That is the truth of suffering. Then the truth of the origin of suffering is that, what I already mentioned, the attachment, the wish, so that we want things to be different from how they are. The view is we can and want to change things also in Buddhism. We want to change ourselves in terms of being attuned to the truth. Because once we are in tune with how things are right now, we can make a contribution. And then we don't have an aggressive contribution, like you know from my side. Sometimes I'm so inspired that I want to shovel things down your throat. You know how unpleasant that is. So then you might remind me that the idea of Hinayana is quite valid and appropriate and matches the need. That is to come to the understanding that you cannot force reality to be different from it is. It can only transform if you first start where you are right now. So the origin of suffering is to see that suffering comes up when you start to crave aggressively. If you are attached, not just if you have a wish. A beautiful wish is fine, allowed. Craving is also allowed, but it is seen as the origin of suffering and causing your own suffering and the suffering of others. Then the third noble truth, so we have the truth of suffering, the origin of suffering, then the cessation of suffering, that is that it can be overcome, that it is not, as we tend to think, like we make a distinction between pain and suffering. Pain is an unavoidable part of life. The physical pain of birth, all the sickness and death, you can't get around. But the suffering, which is what the mind adds to it by wanting things to be different, that can be overcome. So there we talk about the cessation of suffering. And the fourth noble truth is the path to overcome suffering, and that's called the Eightfold Path. Right speech, right action, right, well, related to body, speech and mind, to summarize the 8 into 3, to learn to work with your mind, which you largely do through meditation, to work with your body, to work with your speech, which is the connection between body and mind, to synchronize those. That is what I wanted to share about the Four Noble Truths. Then the only thing you still have to survive for this time is refuge. What does it mean to be a Buddhist, to take refuge? Traditionally, you take refuge in 3 things. There is another list to go. You take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. The Buddha, of course, a historical person who made a journey himself. So here the key point is that you take refuge in the Buddha as an example. Not in the Buddha as the one who will grant you something, salvation, who will solve your issues. No, you take refuge in the Buddha as an example. The Buddha himself was born as a prince, in his case, a human being who came in a shocking way to realize that people are suffering. In fact, his time was similar to ours. His father very much wanted him not to see suffering, old age, sickness and death. He kept him in the palace. He wanted him to experience only pleasant things. He tried to hide him from pain and suffering. But in doing so, when the Buddha did get across old age, sickness and death, he was more shocked. It struck him very deeply because he had not realized that it was a part of reality, a part of the truth of suffering. So when he did start to realize, it struck him very much, and then he had the instant desire the wish to understand it, at least deeply, and then secondly to overcome the suffering part of it, not the pain, but the suffering part of it. So if you take refuge in the Buddha as an example, you are not saying, I pray to the Buddha, please fix my life. You are looking at the Buddha as a person who had Hindu teachers who taught him lots of things, but at the end of the day he said, I have to find out the next step. They can teach me all sorts of calm states of mind and they're beautiful, but it's not what I want. I don't want to just space out and be calm and be able to stand on one leg and be very stable and calm. I want to get at the truth and I want to be fully connected to my own heart. So for that journey he realized he had to follow his own intuition. So if you take refuge in the Buddha as an example, it's interesting because the Buddha stopped to hope for a solution by somebody else, leading to some solution that would flip suffering into the complete opposite of always super pleasure. He boycotted his previous teachers. You could say he respected them, but he felt, I have to find my own way. And he stopped hoping that the teachings would bring you, would get away from pain. So suffering can be overcome, but pain is a part of life. And well, his radical step was to say, I don't try anymore to get a permanent body, an always joyful mind. Always joyful mind you pretty much could get. But wanting for it too much, of course, blocks the very likelihood that you achieve it. Back, the Buddha as an example is that you take heart, that you are inspired by the fact that the historical Buddha and anybody who you believe has done similar things, that at some point in your life you take individual steps, you follow your own heart, wisdom, both your intellect. It's not only about your heart saying it has to be emotional, it is about following your best knowledge, your best judgment of what works for you, rather than always relying on others to confirm yourself. So that was the radical step that he took, and that a Buddhist, if you take refuge in the Buddha as an example, you take inspiration from that. Second, probably I'll go faster for the next two, because there were three, Buddha, Dharma and Sangha. Dharma, I guess you know, it means both truth, just truth, any truth, as well as the Buddhist teachings. So the teachings are, the real teachings are about the truth. If there's any teaching that doesn't ring true to you, it is not yet Dharma. If you believe gravity doesn't exist and somebody says gravity applies to all physical objects, then to you it doesn't appear to be Dharma. I guess it is, but you don't grasp it, you don't realize it at that point. So Dharma is all the teachings which made you more in line, in sync with truth, reality as it is. And it has, of course, it has all sorts of methods, meditation being a very central one. A few words about meditation. Meditation is very often thought of as trying to alter your state of mind, trying to make you happy, 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 and trying to have no thoughts. Somehow this idea is that you should be without any thoughts, sort of blank. That's neither realistic nor helpful, because as soon as you want to be without thoughts, you see your thoughts as something intruding and you make them an enemy. And of course it is about getting at peace. The path of meditation is about calm abiding, creating a peaceful state of mind, which is embracing what actually happens. So if thoughts happen, you don't need to follow them, but it's like clouds in the sky. They're very welcome. They're part of the sky, so they're not a foreign body that has to be excluded. They're part of the reality. And sitting meditation makes you more familiar with the patterns that happen in your mind. So Buddha Dharma, I was talking about Dharma as both teachings about explaining what the Buddha saw, and then always the Buddha said, I teach you what I have seen, but don't trust my words because you see me as the Buddha. Test it for yourself. So he gives you like a recipe to make the bread, He doesn't say, believe in my bread, but make your own bread. I give you some ingredients. He gives you meditation instruction. With that, you can check and find out for yourself. Certain things he has found out, you cannot yet check for yourself. So at some point you trust that, hey, I have a lot of respect for this guy. What he tells me now is likely to be true, but I want to find out eventually for myself with direct experience rather than hearsay. That's maybe enough for sharing about the Dharma. The second thing you take refuge in, the Dharma is the teachings about the truth. So you respect what has been handed over as being words and instructions coming from the Buddha, but you're also extremely curious to find out things for yourself. So Dharma is externally related to teachings of the Buddha, but internally to your own experience, which you churn out. First, you seem to have found out the truth about anger, and then you go deeper and you found out the truth about sadness, probably. So it is working with what you experience yourself and going deeper and deeper and finding out what it really is all about. What makes life beautiful for you, which is a question you have to answer. Third, and here it becomes quite interesting actually. The third part you take refuge in is the Sangha. And Sangha, Gendun, the Buddha is of course Sangye and Dharma is Chö. So like in Chöden, names that are common in Bhutan. Then the Sangha is the community of practitioners, the community of people who walk that same similar path of being inspired by the Buddha, trying to get to the truth. What is very important to me and was refreshed recently is that the definition is not so much those who call themselves a Buddhist, or it's not specific to any lineage that I take refuge in the people going to the Shambhala Center and all the rest of the people I find a little bit less. That's not the point. You take refuge in those who you believe, in your perception, make this individual journey, and therefore you are not going to totally lean on them, because then if one falls, you all fall over together. You are not like chewing gum stuck together, but you do interact with real people who are alive right now and you can meet them. The problem with the Buddha is you can't meet him, at least the historical Buddha. We are not meeting him, so we can have a lot of inspiration, but not meeting him is a little bit convenient because nobody ever confronts you with, you could sit in a cave and feel very enlightened, but by not interacting with others, your frustrated mind is not triggered enough. So that's why I'm so happy to be with you guys for the time being. So Sangha is the community of people who take the Buddha and the Dharma serious, but there's nowhere in the definition that you have to be believing in the Buddha and making a distinction between those who call themselves a Buddhist and those who do not call themselves a Buddhist. So it's a very open kind of attitude and definition. Those who seem to be following the path of the truth, who struggle for themselves to find out things, the truth for themselves, probably making use of wisdom that has been handed over, those are the Sangha, and you treat them with respect, and you to different levels and different degrees, you trust them, and you trust the wisdom that they relay. Again, with the attitude of what you have found out, since you are a person, I have a basic trust, I have an inclination to be curious about what you say. But still, the real reality for me that counts is what I have verified myself. But what you hand over to me, the forms, I have respect for what you build up. I'm inspired by what you do. I'm on a similar journey and I can recognize myself. I want to interact with you. And once again, becoming a Buddhist doesn't mean you become part of any of the many. You don't choose between Hinayana, Theravada, Mahayana or Vajrayana as yet. You don't choose for a particular community. You don't choose for a particular teacher. In fact, as I stress over and over again, you don't distinguish much between those who call themselves Buddhists and others. You just go on your personal journey, take inspiration from others who are on similar journeys. So it's likely that you end up in a Buddhist center or in a monastery and take courses there. But if you feel the genuineness in people who go to church and you feel drawn to go to church, that is in no way contradictory to you taking refuge as a Buddhist in Buddha, Dharma and Sangha. Maybe intellectually I could say a few more words on that. Very much key, as I said in the definition of taking refuge in the Buddha, is that you do not expect miracles in the sense of every moment is miraculous, but not miracles in the sense of if I become friends with such and so, another human being, a guru or a god, then they will fix things for me. So Buddhism is sometimes called a non-theist tradition. That is to say, gods are not denied, spirits in nature are not denied. There's realities, a very intriguing view from the Vajrayana point of view, of energies that do influence us. But we don't take refuge in any of those as, I want to make friends with you and you fix it for me. That is the definition within the tradition, as I have been taught, why we call ourselves non-theist. We don't believe in God fixing things for us. Whether gods or spiritual beings exist which don't have a body like us, that question is not immediately answered. In fact, the Buddha was asked a question like that. He was asked whether God existed by Hindu people who wanted to have a debate with him, and he kept silent. He didn't answer. And that is often interpreted as he was not interested in a philosophical debate. He was interested in human experience, particularly to get rid of suffering, which can be so intense. And he didn't want to hold a view. He could have debated either way, but he felt that that would divert the energy. So we want our energy on practicing, having a kind heart, first to ourselves. That's stressed in Hinayana Theravada tradition. It's not about being unkind to others. That's sometimes the Mahayana tradition. We tend to think that, oh, that one is social because it's socially engaged. That's true. But you cannot look back and say, oh, the Hinayana tradition, the genuine Hinayana practitioners are sort of egomaniacs who just want a goodie for themselves and don't want to share it. It's all genuine practitioners. I don't know who's genuine, who is not, but just to indicate that it's not for a namesake. All genuine practitioners, and maybe one more note, in fact, everybody goes back and forth between being genuine and being diverted, myself included, you might know that. Sometimes I'm able to share a lot and then I'm so happy, and sometimes I get completely stuck and then frustrated, and then it gets from bad to worse. So you don't have the right people and the wrong people, but at least you have people who are inspired to go the right path. I lost track pretty much halfway. But to sum up, refuge, becoming a Buddhist, which is the first vow you take. You take 3 vows with these 3 yanas or vehicles or tekpas. The first one is the refuge vow, I talked about a bit. The next one we will discuss in the next talk. That is then about called the Bodhisattva vow, to dedicate yourself to others. The third one has a very special name, that's called the Samaya vow, binding you to a pure perception of the world, of a seeing enlightenment in this world rather than hoping only for a new state of mind and another world. Maybe so much for an introduction to Buddhism and how it is classified, once again by the how it is classified in 3 yanas, which is the way of looking by the Vajrayana tradition, which is dominant in Tibet and Bhutan and parts of Nepal and parts of India and up to Mongolia. Yeah, that's the tradition that we also firstly belong to. Well, that tradition makes this distinction in 3 major yanas, and then there's lots of details to it. Sometimes we talk about even more yanas, but I want to share the view of these 3 yanas and one point I like to repeat. It's not about the first grade one and the second grade one looking down on the first grade. It is building forth on. There is no genuine Mahayana without genuine refuge, and the refuge is so clearly Theravada or Hinayana tradition. And there's no Vajrayana playing around with energies, seeing things as extremely sacred, without first processing yourself and connecting to fellow human beings. Then it would be a little bit, or pretty much trippy, if you would say the world is enlightened and all the energies are fantastic, and let's have alcohol, drugs and sex and just say that the world, everything is spiritual anyway. That's not the view. It's that you need, if you work with all the three, you can work just with Hinayana, you can work just with Hinayana and Mahayana, or you can work with all three of them. But whatever you take is, it's not about the low teachings, the bad teachings, the medium and the really good ones. That's my understanding. And I'm going to question about your understanding through a number of questions I put with this link. And I hope that you enjoy, I hope that you enjoy and at least find it an interesting experiment and less excruciating than our family meetings sitting together. Once again, you know, I want to share something which is important to me, and now I give some of the basics, and well, I'm curious whether you understand what I'm saying. Then later we come to whether it makes any sense to you. But even if it doesn't, if you feel like I understand how they cut this cake, but I want to have a totally different cake, that's not today's issue. Today is what I understand of this particular cake and whether I can transmit that to you as a basis so that later on we can have this discussion about, well, what about this cake? A traditional ending by this merit. May all attain omniscience. May defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness and death. From the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings.